If you don't trust the government 100%, then you should own precious metals. The government officials don't have much honor. They will do everything they can to stay in power. They behave worse than the mafia.
Please join us for our next live stream, Sunday, November 15th at 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll go over current events, past guests, and of course, gold and silver news. Once again, our next live stream will be Sunday, November 15th, 9 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira. Once again, if you are new to our channel or you have not already done so, please do subscribe. Hit the bell to be notified on new updates and give us a thumbs up. If you like what we do, we truly do appreciate your support. Dr. Marc Faber joins us today. Dr. Faber, the editor and publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report, which highlights unusual investment opportunities. He's well known for his contrarian investment approach. And we're delighted to have him here back as a return guest. It's time to saddle up and silver up for Dr. Marc Faber. Dr. Faber, welcome back to SBTV. How are you doing?
Well, thank you very much for having me on your program. And I'm doing fine so far, so good.
Okay, glad you
It's
had
a new lifestyle. It's a new lifestyle.
It's not just lifestyle, it's a new look. It looks great on you there.
Yes.
Okay.
It's now Christmas time. I'm Father Christmas.
You could
Santa
pass
Claus.
Okay, now I know where to go. We all need to go see Dr. Faber for Christmas. Dr. Faber, it's 11 months into 2020, and we are still seeing reports of corporate bankruptcies, business closures happening every week all around the world, not just in the US. And just last week, for example, Singapore's retail chain Robinsons, which survived the Great Depression and World War II, is also set to close its doors after some 162 years. So my question is, are we witnessing the world's slide into a greater depression? And have you witnessed anything like this in your lifetime?
Well, I don't think that anybody has ever witnessed what we just experienced, not in our lifetime, but in history, that governments that basically are democratically elected go out and tell you and me, you have to shut down your business, you have to shut down your hotel, your restaurant, basically shutting down the entire economy. We had pandemics before in history. But then what happened is that the people that were affected by the plague or whatnot, these people were isolated, but not the others. You understand? This is something new, that the government says, okay, you close down your business, you don't go to school, you don't go to work, and we, the government, will print money and give it to you so that you survive. This is unique. This has never happened in history, because throughout history, and I have to point this out, social security, as we have in the Western democratic world, is an experiment. We never had that before in history. And so when you say to me, well, have you ever experienced this in your life? No, I certainly not, but nobody else either, in previous generations or whatnot. Because in previous generations, your parents and grandparents, they didn't have social security. They had to go and work. They had to survive somehow, somewhere. And I think this is a very unique experience. And in my opinion, this will lead to less freedom for people. You know, that the government, it began with 9/11, when everybody had to start being checked at airports and so forth. It's a containment of your freedom.
Okay, it's a great point. That's a great point. So you see it going all the way back to 9/11. But I got to ask you, how much worse can it get considering the knock-on effects from unemployment, loss of mall tenants, and fall in demand from suppliers of goods and services?
Well, how much worse can it get? Well, if you and I are in jail in chains, I suppose will be worse than it is now. Well, let's hope it's not going to happen. But you can get, things can go very bad. I mean, the Germans, they went into World War II full of hopes, and the first year everything went fine, and then things began to deteriorate with their expedition to Russia, which began, as far as I recall, in June 1941. You understand? First, the governments can support the economy with money. So actually, when you look at incomes and that spending in the US, it's not so bad because a lot of people get more money through the transfer payments by the government than they were getting before working. So we have this unusual situation. But of course, it's not sustainable in the long run. You cannot keep on printing money and hoping that it doesn't lead to some kind of inflation. Well, in the last, say, 20 years or more, it led to asset inflation, where asset prices went up, and it also led to very high valuations for equities and real estate. And as you know, bonds, if we take a bond and we value it as a future source of income, well, in Europe, we have negative yielding bonds in Germany, in the Netherlands, in France, in Switzerland, and also in Japan. So the sources of income, your cash flow, is no longer there. And then you ask yourself, what do I do with my money? Well, I think it leads me back to precious metals. I think the precious metals are in this environment relatively attractive.
Yeah, we'll touch on gold and silver in a bit. You mentioned inflation. There are economists who also still mention the word deflation. Short term, Dr. Faber, your opinion, which concerns you more, deflation or inflation?
I think we can't be overly dogmatic about deflation and inflation. I think in an economic system, there will always be some kind of inflation in, say, if we look at the economy, such as your house, and assuming your house has 5 or 6 rooms, then there could be monetary inflation in one room, say because it's a heated room, and in wintertime everybody wants to go to the heated room. So the price of the heated room goes up relative to the veranda, which is cold and outside. So in a house, you have some areas where there will be inflation and some others where there will be deflation. Say, if we look today at commercial real estate and urban and rural real estate, in a environment of a pandemic, I think more and more people, especially people with children or elderly people, they will say, well, what is our benefit to be in New York City? The restaurants are closed. In wintertime, we don't like to eat outside. The movie theaters are closed. There are no tourists. The shows are closed. The museums are closed. Why do we live in New York City? We rather go and live in the countryside, where in wintertime the weather is a bit warmer, say Florida, where we have no state taxes. And okay, we don't see our friends anymore and the corner shop and the corner bar in New York. But since it's closed, there's no point to be there. So a lot of people will move out of cities into the countryside. Now, businesses, there are lots of banks and other businesses that have told employees that from now on, permanently, they can work from home. Now, what does it do to a city center if you can work from home? The restaurants close down because even if they can reopen, they have no business because everybody's at home. The bars, half of them will close down. The hair salon will close down. And you can't get a new tattoo in downtown New York because the tattoo shop will also close down, and so forth and so on. So with that, real estate in commercial centers, which is expensive anyway, in my opinion, will go down, and real estate in the countryside will rather move up in price. Say if you're in Tokyo or in Hong Kong or Singapore, the price of real estate is very high. You move an hour away from these centers, or London is high, but you move 1 hour by train away, you can buy a beautiful house for little money. Extremely inexpensive are properties in the rural areas of Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, the Balkan countries, Kosovo, Albania, Croatia, Macedonia. All these have inexpensive real estate. And so I think there will be, in some cities, property prices going down. And in areas far away from the socialists, the prices will go up. The further away from the socialist centers of New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Detroit, Chicago, the better.
Will it go back to where people will move back into the city centers? I mean, how long do you think this sort of a trend will take hold?
Well, but I want to tell you, in my case, okay, I don't live in the countryside, but because I live in Chiang Mai and I bought some properties a long time ago, already in 1981, and some other properties I bought, the one I'm staying here during the Asian crisis in 97, it feels like the countryside because it's a small city by world standards. It has less than 1 million people, and my property is so large that it feels like the countryside. I could keep some cows here. And I don't want to do it because I know I will have to take care of them because my wife is certainly not going to do it. So, or I could keep some chicken, but it's again a lot of work. But in theory, it's large enough that I could survive on this piece of land. And for me to move back to a city would be certainly at my age very difficult because, you know, at my age, it's more difficult to make friends. And at my age, when I was younger, until actually 10 years ago, I used to go every night. I used to go out every night of the week and the weekends and so forth. That in my present situation, I no longer do.
What's going on right now? Do you think the government stimulus plans and money printing will be enough to pull it out of this recession?
I think that if you look at economic activity and you start with an indicator of 100 at the peak of economic activity, sometimes between 2018 and 2019, because some businesses started to contract already in 2018. But let's say we take a peak, say in the third or fourth quarter 2019. If we take that as 100, and we dropped recently in March to say 70, I think we'll go back to around 85, 90, but I don't think we'll go back to 100 anytime soon. There are some countries that have already fully recovered. You know, China basically has kind of fully recovered. But it's deceptive also because a lot of the recovery is financed by money printing. And that is not leading to sustainable growth. Now, in the case of China, because the markets are not yet saturated, I can see that we will exceed the peak of 2019 again. But we will not have the same dynamic growth that we have previously. I think it will be more muted.
Okay. Yeah, China's a pretty unique situation because not only do they export a lot, they can consume. Their nation can consume and their GDP will do just fine.
Sure. Plus, a lot of the borrowings and a lot has been used for capital investments. They built airports, they built trains, they built electric power plants, they built dams, the tunnels, bridges, everything. Their infrastructure and also the technology to build infrastructure is superb. The US, the infrastructure by and large is not very good. That's why you have all these power outages. That's why you have wildfires. The country is badly equipped with infrastructure.
Perhaps should the US go back to doing infrastructure type jobs to get people back to work?
Yes, but I'm, of course, always against government spending because there's so much waste and there's so much theft. I mean, we look at the election. Some people claim that there was massive voter fraud. I don't know, I'm not an expert, but it seems to me that from what I read and from the statistics I saw, that suddenly some states had a lot of votes that came out of the blue and were for Mr. Biden. So I don't know, but the Republicans claim this and the others claim that. Maybe everybody cheats. But the one thing I can say, small governments usually lead to more economic growth, and big government actually obstructs economic growth. In other words, the larger the government is, the less dynamic an economy you will have. The extreme is, of course, the planning economy of the socialist communist regimes. There you had contracting economies because the government was planning everything. And you had especially, and that I have to remind all the people that want more government intervention, I have to remind them that under socialism, communism, the standards of living of people went down for everybody. And since these countries opened up, whether it's in India or in China, Eastern Europe or Russia, in every instance, without exception, the standards of living have been going up, without exception. And that the young people who vote always for more government interventions, they have to be reminded. The more interventions you have, the less economic growth you will have, and the less freedom. I mean, Milton Friedman, he wrote a very good book. Of course, the economists, they hate him because he's the only economist that got it 100% right about small governments and freedom. He wrote the book, Capitalism and Freedom. This is a very good book. This makes a lot of sense. But nowadays, nobody will ever quote Friedman because they don't like him.
Yeah, Milton Friedman and the Chicago Boys, right? That used to be a staple for Economy 101. Everybody had to know who Milton Friedman was. Dr. Faber, can we conclude logically then that if money printing and debt will only continue to increase in the near future, gold would warrant a higher price due to inflation and currency debasement?
It will warrant a higher price due to depreciation of paper money. And actually, if you look at Bitcoins, they have performed this year much better than gold. They've gone up dramatically because it's also an asset that has a limited quantity, whereas paper money has an unlimited quantity thanks to our central bankers, these intelligent academics. And all I can say is, if people choose not to own any gold, silver, and platinum, it's a choice that expresses high confidence in the integrity of central bankers and politicians. If you don't own any precious metals, it's like saying, I trust Washington, D.C., I trust the academics at the Fed that never worked a day in their lives, that write useless academic papers, that do not know how poorer families live, under what conditions. They never seen it because they are ferried around in limousines. And that is the expression of trust in government. And if you don't trust the government 100%, then you should own precious metals. It doesn't mean that these mafia-like behaving politicians, actually they behave worse than the mafia, because the mafia had a lot of integrity. A word was a word, and you gave your word that you would pay your debts. You had to pay them. If you didn't pay them, it wasn't a very pleasant experience. But the government officials don't have much honor. But I'd say they will do everything they can to stay in power and actually to increase their power. And we've seen this with the current elections. And I think the strength of precious metals today is actually an expression that a lot of people have second questions about the election outcome, because each party will claim that the election was stolen, whatever happens, and nothing much will be done. And the Fed will then print money, and they will spend the money. If the Republicans continue to control the Senate, they have, of course, a lot of power about the budget, about the spending of the money. And then more will go into defense, and more will go into tax cuts for the rich and so forth. But money will be printed. It's been announced already. And the foreign governments will do the same. So you want to own some assets, you want to own some real estate, as I said, in the countryside, far away from the socialists. You want to own some precious metals and maybe some cryptocurrencies.
So having observed the issues with the US dollar in the last 2 decades and how calls for de-dollarization is growing stronger, are you ready to conclude that the reserve currency status of the US dollar is coming to an end?
Well, maybe all paper currencies are coming to an end and will be replaced by some kind of electronic currencies. But if the electronic currencies are issued by the government, I wouldn't trust them very much either. So it leads me back to the view that probably what makes most sense are precious metals. Now, I'm not saying that gold is particularly cheap here. It's actually expensive compared to oil. It's expensive compared to all the agricultural commodities, which, by the way, started to move up. And I think that's a symptom of future consumer price inflation, where food prices will go up. And gold is, of course, expensive compared to silver still. The silver ratio has adjusted somewhat, but not enough. And it's expensive compared to platinum.
Okay.
So I would suggest to an investor to diversify. I think the gold shares are relatively cheap, because a lot of gold shares are today lower than they were in 2011 or 2015.
Would this lacking confidence in currencies, pretty much all currencies, perhaps be setting up gold as a type of a neutral asset that maybe could back currencies and restore some confidence?
Yes, but I don't think that Western governments are interested in honest money. As I said, they want to print And they want to, with the money printing at essentially zero interest rates, they can gain more power. So I'm not sure that Western governments, I'm not sure any government is interested in a stable currency. The Romans also printed money. Every country has printed money, basically.
Why do you think there's no obvious second place candidate that could replace the dollar right now that the experts can agree on and have the utmost confidence in?
Well, I'd say the stock market, to some extent, has actually replaced the dollar, because wealthy people, they don't have their money, say $10 billion stashed in cash in a bank or in treasury bills. They have $10 billion invested in stocks. So the stock market is kind of replacing traditional paper money. It's also, you give to people some money, they're going to buy either ETFs or a mutual fund or gamble on the Robinhood platform, or something, but they will not keep it in cash.
Should we be expecting even a greater bust ahead given the problems with the sky-high debt that they've been existing even before the onset of the pandemic?
Yes, I think it could become quite unpleasant. And the question is, of course, tomorrow or in 5 years or 10 years. But yes, I think we've seen, in my view, peak standards of living in the Western world. I think in India and in China and Southeast Asia, the standards of living will still go up under one condition, is peace. And I believe that when the Western world will see their standards of living going down and down and down, and that some prosperity is developing in Asia, there'll be tensions. The Trump trade war is not about, just trade. It's about how do we push down China, its economic growth and its path to prosperity.
You mentioned Asia and China. How do traditional Western powers acknowledge another superpower coming up on the rise?
The Western world has committed economic and social suicide with their welfare state that they can't afford, with incentives for people not to work, and with the immigration policies they had, whereby people can come into Europe who have no intention whatsoever, and I repeat, no intention whatsoever to work. They come to get the benefits for no other reason. And some, they come to create trouble, as we now well know, and as we've had the visible proof that this is a fact. The Western governments don't want to admit that because of their ill-fated immigration policies. In my opinion, it should be far more restricted. But this is a minority view, and people will accuse me, oh, you're racist and so forth. I don't care. I think the Western world has to wake up and not commit economic suicide. But I just like to say here, having observed and traveled and seen hundreds of countries that were at one stage extremely prosperous. Let's say you take a city-state like Venice. Venice was a dominant power in the 15th and early 16th century. A dominant power. They controlled the trade between Asia and the Western world. Basically the Silk Road. The silk trade went to Venice, and from there the products were distributed in Northern Europe, but it passed through Venice, most of it. And they had these trading privileges, both from the Ottomans and from the Habsburg Austrians. And anyway, then this privilege went down. They became part of the Italian states, but they survived reasonably well. It's not a prosperous city anymore, but it's a major tourist attraction. Or you go to Salzburg. Salzburg was a very prosperous, independent German Austrian city in the Austria-Hungarian Empire. But they lost their privileges also over time. But they aged well. They have festivals in Salzburg. It's become a tourist center and so forth. So you can age well. You know, that some stars, they don't age well because they're at already 50, they're broke, or they're on drugs, or they die early, or whatever it is. And others, like Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, they age very well because they take drugs, but in a moderate way. The governments will never moderate their spending. They will always spend more. And so I think what you hinted at, yeah, one day you'll have a major crisis.
Okay, so in the spirit of Mick Jagger, you can't always get what you want, right?
Yes.
Stock markets today, right now, with what's going on with the valuations, is it a true reflection of where the economy is really at?
No, the stock market, the level of stocks in the US, the indices, they're at this level because of tech stocks. They have a very high valuation. There are some tech stocks that maybe where you could justify the valuation, like semiconductor companies. You could argue, well, we are in an age where everything will require semiconductors and so forth. It's a cyclical business. In my view, there will be a slowdown regardless. But so some valuations maybe you can justify and others you can't. I think more reflection of where the stock market should be are the European markets. The European markets today, say the Stoxx 50 index, is a broad index of 50 different companies in Europe, is no higher than in 1999, 20 years later. That is a fairly good reflection of what has happened to the Western economies. In Asia, of course, stocks are higher than they were in 99, but not in every country that much higher. And so I think we have to be very careful. What is going on in the economy is maybe better reflected by the performance of GE, of the banks, and of General Motors than if you look at Facebook and Amazon. But Amazon is an interesting case. Maybe the company is worth much more than it is now. But it's an interesting case in the sense that most of the jobs it creates are low-paying jobs. Of course, they have at the top an elite, and this, I think, is the reflection of the stock market. You have an elite at the top, the tech billionaires out of Silicon Valley. Then you have the billionaires out of the monetary system, hedge fund managers, hedge fund owners, bankers, and so forth. And then you have gaming kings, that is also when money is printed, people go gambling. But now they can't, but it will come back and they will gamble online. If they don't go to the casino, they'll gamble online. So there are some industries, or like we use Zoom. This is a company maybe they'll get a lot of competition one day and everybody has this technology and it may be simplified in future. But basically, what it does is, whereas before, board of or directors of boards of companies, they would meet 4 times a year in person. Now they can meet with Zoom. Everybody's happy. They don't need to travel uncomfortably. They don't need to be insulted by some immigration officers or some security TSA people and so forth. They can stay at home and they can have the board meeting and drink at the same time and smoke, as I will do shortly.
All right. Dr. Marc Faber, before we wrap up, can you let our listeners know more about the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report?
Well, I have 2 reports. Thank you very much for asking me. I have a website report, and it can be subscribed at gloomboomdoom.com. And I have another report that also goes out now by email, but it's more detailed and more geared to institutional investors, strategists, and very wealthy people that actually can implement the ideas and the strategies that I suggest.
Okay, Dr. Marc Faber, we thank you for coming on and allowing us some of your time, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. Well, I also wish you all the best. And to you and your viewers, I wish you all a wonderful festive season. It's probably no longer politically correct to say, I wish you Merry Christmas, but I wish you, whatever religion you believe to, in a wonderful festive season.
All right, we thank you for that, and we'll wish you also Merry Christmas. You take care of yourself over in Thailand. We'll see you. Bye-bye. That was Dr. Marc Faber, editor and publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom Report. For more information of his work and his views on the economy, please visit his website, www.gloomboomdoom.com. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the SBTV channel to be updated on new content, and do also check out the SBTV podcast on iTunes and Spotify.